New York City, 1972. Lou Reed sat alone in a recording studio, cigarette smoke curling around the microphone. In his mind, faces flickered like old film reels. Holly Woodlawn stepping off a Greyhound bus from Miami with nothing but dreams. Candy Darling dying in a hospital bed, still believing she was a star. Joe Dallesandro's blank stare that made teenage girls scream. These were not characters from his imagination. These were real people who had walked through Andy Warhol's factory and emerged as something the world had never seen. And Lou Reed was about to immortalize them in a song that would slip past every radio censor in America, hiding its revolutionary message in a melody so smooth that housewives would hum it while doing dishes, never realizing they were singing about transgender sex workers and the underground world that polite society pretended did not exist. But that night was not just about writing a hit song. It was about revenge, grief, and a debt Lou Reed could never repay. 3 years earlier, Andy Warhol had been shot and nearly killed. The superstars who once ruled that silver kingdom were scattered, dying, or forgotten. Lou Reed, who had escaped Warhol's orbit to build his solo career, carried a weight he rarely acknowledged. Now, with David Bowie producing his Transformer album and mainstream success within reach, Lou Reed made a decision that would define his legacy. He would take the stories of people that America wanted to erase, and he would make America dance to their tragedy. If you want to discover more untold stories from rock history's most controversial figures, subscribe now, because what you are about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about the most famous song of 1972. To understand that London studio moment, you have to go back to 1965, when Lou Reed walked into Andy Warhol's factory for the first time. The factory was a silver-walled loft on East 47th Street, where Warhol had created his own universe. Here, outcasts became superstars, not despite their differences, but because of them. A transgender actress was a leading lady. A drag queen was a work of art. Lou Reed came from suburban Long Island, where being different meant electroshock therapy. His parents had sent him to psychiatric treatment as a teenager to cure his bisexuality. The factory was the first place where Lou Reed's darkness was not something to be fixed, but something to be celebrated. And Lou Reed watched these people with the intensity of someone who had been taught to hide what they were now seeing displayed like art. Holly Woodlawn was born Harold Danhockle in Puerto Rico and transformed herself into a blonde bombshell who moved through the factory like she owned it. She had hitchhiked from Miami to New York with nothing except the certainty that she was meant to be a star. She would tell stories about survival with such theatrical flair that you forgot you were hearing about pain. Candy Darling, born James Slattery, had reinvented herself as a 1940s Hollywood starlet with platinum blonde hair and a voice that sounded like it came from a black and white film. She carried herself with the dignity of someone who knew she was living on borrowed time. Even in the factory, Candy knew that the world outside would never accept her. Lou Reed, watching her glide through Warhol's parties, understood the distance between who you are and who the world allows you to be. Joe Dallesandro was different. Not transgender, not flamboyantly gay, just beautiful in a way that made people uncomfortable. Warhol put him in film after film, often naked, always blank-faced. Joe needed money for his family, so he became an icon without trying. By 1968, the factory was changing. Too many drugs, too much desperation masked as celebration. Then, on June 3, 1968, everything shattered. Valerie Solanas walked into the factory and shot Andy Warhol multiple times. Warhol nearly died. When he survived, he was never the same. The open-door policy ended. The The superstars who had been Warhol's family became ghosts. Lou Reed had already left the Velvet Underground, bitter and convinced Warhol had used him. But he could not stop thinking about those people who had shown him what bravery looked like. In 1970, Candy Darling was diagnosed with lymphoma. The black market hormones that gave her the body she wanted had also been killing her. Holly Woodlawn struggled, watching the factory dream dissolve. Joe Dallesandro moved to Europe, but America remembered him only as Warhol's nude muse. Lou Reed watched from a distance. His solo career was going nowhere. He was drinking too much and wondering if leaving the Velvet Underground had been his biggest mistake. And then David Bowie called. David Bowie in 1972 was ascending to rock godhood. Ziggy Stardust had just been released, and Bowie had become the avatar of glam rock. But Bowie was also a genuine Lou Reed fanatic. He had studied Reed's lyrics like sacred texts, and now, with RCA Records backing, he wanted to resurrect Lou Reed's career. "Come to London, work with me and Mick Ronson, and we will make you a star." Lou Reed was suspicious. He had been used before, but he also knew this was likely his last chance. So in summer 1972, he flew to London and walked into Trident Studios. The plan was to take Lou Reed's underground credibility and give it commercial polish, to make songs that could play on radio without losing their edge. The sessions were tense. Bowie was enthusiastic, full of ideas. Lou Reed was resistant, protective of his songs, but they also recognized in each other a shared obsession with outcasts. One night, after a frustrating session, Lou Reed stayed late in the studio alone. He picked up an acoustic guitar and started playing a bass line, simple and repetitive. And then he started singing, not about himself, but about them. Holly, Candy, Joe, all the people who had walked through the factory and shown him what courage really looked like. The song was called "Walk on the Wild Side," and it was unlike anything Lou Reed had written before. The Velvet Underground songs had been harsh, confrontational. This was smooth, almost jazzy, with a saxophone line that would hypnotize you. The melody was so gentle that you could miss what the lyrics were actually saying, and that was exactly the point. Each verse was a miniature biography. Holly came from Miami, hitchhiked across the USA, plucked her eyebrows on the way, shaved her legs, and then he was a she. In 4 lines, Lou Reed told you everything, including the pronoun shift that signaled her transformation. It was revolutionary because it was matter of fact. Holly was a she because she said she was, and that was the end of the discussion. The second verse was about Candy Darling. Candy came from out on the island. In the back room she was everybody's darling, but she never lost her head. The reference was clear enough that anyone paying attention would catch it, but buried in a melody so sweet that radio programmers might miss it. Lou Reed was saying that Candy Darling was a star, not despite what she had to do to survive, but because she never let survival destroy who she was. But here is what almost no one understood in 1972, what Lou Reed was counting on them not understanding. Every verse was about people that mainstream America considered criminals and perverts. Holly Woodlawn was a transgender woman at a time when that identity had no legal recognition. Candy Darling was openly living as a woman despite being assigned male at birth. The hustlers in other verses were literally criminals. And the chorus, that gentle invitation to take a walk on the wild side, was asking listeners to empathize with people they had been taught to fear. Lou Reed was pulling off a magic trick. He was making a song about transgender sex workers and drug dealers, and he was going to get it played on AM radio stations across America. Housewives would sing along, Teenagers would request it, and none of them would fully realize they were being asked to humanize the people society had declared inhuman. It was subversion of the highest order, and it only worked because the melody was so smooth, because Lou Reed's vocal delivery was so deadpan, because the production was so immaculate that it slipped past every defense. When Lou Reed played the demo for David Bowie the next morning, Bowie recognized the genius of it. But he also understood that Lou Reed was doing something Bowie himself had never quite managed. Bowie's androgyny was performance, carefully calculated. Lou Reed's song was about real people who had no escape route, who were what they were and paid the price every single day. The difference between theater and testimony. The recording session became legendary. Herbie Flowers played the iconic double bass line, creating that thick, rolling groove. Ronnie Ross added the baritone saxophone solo, smooth and jazzy, and Lou Reed sang it in one take, his voice flat and observational, like he was reading from a diary he had kept hidden for years. When RCA Records executives first heard "Walk on the Wild Side," there was panic. The references were too obvious, the subject matter too controversial. Some executives wanted to bury the song, but David Bowie fought for it, and Lou Reed refused to compromise. The song would be released as written, or not at all. Finally, RCA made a calculated gamble. They would release it and see what happened. The gamble paid off. "Walk on the Wild Side" was released in November 1972, and within weeks it was climbing the charts. Radio programmers played it because it sounded sophisticated, because the saxophone gave it jazz respectability. Most of them either did not understand the lyrics or chose not to care. The song reached number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming Lou Reed's only top 40 hit. Teenagers bought the single without knowing who Holly Woodlawn was. Adults hummed along without catching the references. But the people who mattered understood. The transgender community heard the song and recognized themselves in it for the first time on mainstream radio. Holly Woodlawn heard it and cried, not because Lou Reed had made her famous, but because he had told her story without shame. Candy Darling, dying in her hospital bed, heard it and smiled, knowing that some version of her would outlive her body. What Lou Reed had done would take years to fully understand. On the surface, it was a catchy pop song, but underneath it was a Trojan horse, smuggling queer identity and transgender existence into millions of homes that would have rejected those ideas if presented directly. Lou Reed was not preaching. He was simply saying, "These people exist. Here are their stories." The song changed what was possible in popular music. After "Walk on the Wild Side," other artists began to test boundaries. Punk rock took inspiration from Lou Reed's refusal to sanitize the street. Every LGBTQ artist who came after walked through a door Lou Reed had kicked open. But there was a cost. Holly Woodlawn never became the mainstream star she dreamed of being. Candy Darling died in 1974 at age 29, still convinced stardom was around the corner. The song made them immortal, but immortality did not pay the rent or cure the cancer. The relationship between Lou Reed and Andy Warhol was never repaired. After the shooting, after the factory became a business, Lou Reed and Warhol saw each other rarely. There was too much history, too much resentment. But "Walk on the Wild Side" was Lou Reed's way of saying something he could never say directly. It was an acknowledgement that the factory had been a place where people could be themselves without apology. It was a thank you to the superstars who had taught him what bravery looked like. In 1987, Andy Warhol died unexpectedly. Lou Reed was devastated. At Warhol's memorial service, Lou Reed did not speak. He sat in the back wearing his dark sunglasses and left before anyone could ask how he felt. But months later, he began working on Songs for Drella, a collaboration with John Cale about Warhol's life. It was the closest Lou Reed ever came to confessing how much those factory years had shaped him. Holly Woodlawn outlived almost everyone from the factory years. She continued performing until she died in 2015 at age 69. She always spoke about Walk on the Wild Side with pride, saying Lou Reed had given her something Hollywood never could, a place in history. But here is what most people miss. The song is not a celebration of danger for its own sake. It is a documentary of survival. Every person mentioned was doing what they had to do to exist in a world that did not want them to exist. Holly hitchhiked to New York because Miami was not safe. Candy worked in back rooms because legitimate roles were not available to transgender women. Society had closed every other door. Lou Reed understood this because he had been on the receiving end of society's attempts to fix him. The electroshock therapy his parents authorized when he was 17 had been intended to erase his bisexuality. It had not worked, but it left him with a permanent understanding of what it felt like to be treated as broken. When he looked at the factory superstars, he saw people who had refused to be fixed. When Lou Reed died in 2013 at age 71, the obituaries all mentioned Walk on the Wild Side. In his final years, Lou Reed had made peace with it. He had married Laurie Anderson, stopped drinking, stopped the self-destructive spiral, and he had started talking about the factory years with something softer than bitterness. In one of his last interviews, a journalist asked Lou Reed if Walk on the Wild Side had made any difference. Lou Reed was quiet, then said, "I hope they knew I tried to get it right. I hope they knew I was not making fun of them, because they were the bravest people I ever met, and I was just the guy with the guitar." The song remains a masterpiece of subversion. Walk on the Wild Side sounds like a relaxed pop song, the kind you could play at a dinner party. But if you listen to the words, really listen, you are hearing the voices of people who were not supposed to have voices, insisting on their humanity in a world that denied it. 50 years after its release, Walk on the Wild Side has been covered by dozens of artists, featured in countless films, analyzed in academic papers. Holly Woodlawn and Candy Darling have been the subjects of documentaries. The factory has been preserved as a crucial moment in American art history, and Lou Reed's legacy as someone who spoke for the outsiders has only grown stronger. But perhaps the most important legacy is this. It proved that popular culture could tell the truth about marginalized people without turning them into jokes or tragedies. Lou Reed found a way to put transgender women and sex workers on the radio and make millions sing along without realizing what they were singing about. And in doing so, he planted seeds that would grow into movements, into visibility, into a world where Holly Woodlawn's journey could be seen not as scandal, but as courage. The factory is gone. The superstars are gone. Andy Warhol is gone. Lou Reed is gone. But that bass line still rumbles, that saxophone still sighs, and those voices still speak. Holly, Candy, Little Joe. They walked on the wild side, and Lou Reed made sure we would never forget them. That night in the London studio, when he sat alone with his guitar and channeled their stories into 3 minutes and 12 seconds, he was not just writing a hit song. He was keeping a promise to the people who had shown him there were other ways to be alive, other ways to be human, other ways to be free. And every time someone hears Walk on the Wild Side for the first time, Every time someone realizes that the smooth song they have been hearing all their life is actually about revolution disguised as entertainment, Lou Reed's promise is kept again. The wild side is not a place you visit for thrills. It is where some people live every single day, with more courage than the comfortable world will ever understand. And Lou Reed spent 3 minutes and 12 seconds making sure you knew their names.